Hey, we're ready to we're good, started, so we're gonna go live here and then
We're live.
we're live.
We're live.
All right, well, good evening, welcome to the work session, Community Police Oversight Work Group. Very pleased to see you all, thank you for being here. We are, meeting here live at Fire Station number 5 at, 19th and Iowa, so thank you to Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical. They posted all of our work sessions for this group throughout our time together, and appreciate them and the city for also providing food for soup and sandwiches from Panera's, soup and salad, excuse me. So thank you for that, appreciate it. This is an open meeting, so the public's welcome. So anybody who's joining us, please make yourself at home, get some food there as well. There's tiramisu for dessert. And then this is also being broadcast on Zoom. So thank you for those of you tuning in on Zoom. This meeting will also be archived and housed on the community engagement portal on the city's website, as are all of our work meetings and community conversations. So thank you all for being here. Very much appreciate all that you've done to get us this far. We're very, very close to getting across the finish line. We've got some final heavy lifts to do. And as a public entity, we need to be meeting in this setting to discuss and make decisions as a group so that we can put forward a final report and recommendations. So we have thus far met for 7 work sessions in this format, and then 2 community engagement conversations that each attended by about 40 or so members of the public. And those meetings were dedicated entirely to community feedback relative to the themes that the Community Police Oversight Work Group is addressing. And the notes from those discussions are also available on the community engagement portal. So the work that you've been tasked with by the City Commission has been to represent community interests relative to community oversight and community police relations, the CPRB perspective, and the police department's perspective on generating ultimately a final report with a set of recommendations for the City Commission's consideration. So a lot of discussion has brought us up to this point. It's been a heavy lift. It's challenging work. I very much appreciate the many hours that you've put in to get us this far. When we last met, we generated some draft ideas for recommendations. We're going to revisit that to clean it up so that we get that into final form. And then the goal is to put all of that into a draft report that will be inclusive of recommendations, as well as a mapping of the complaint process. So when the public has a complaint about officer of conduct, for example, or department, and they file a complaint, the CPRB is tasked with reviewing appeals of a certain type of complaint. And so we've been tasked with looking at that and also putting forward recommendations relative to that. And so you've done some significant work in that area. We need to bring that full circle and put a point on it tonight, and then get that into the report so that you can review that as a draft report, see all the recommendations all in one place, the accompanying narrative. And then once we've got the green light from you on that, then that will be forwarded on in a City Commission packet. And then this group will present that report to the City Commission for their consideration. So we're very close to getting to where we can put that in front of everybody. So I appreciate all your efforts up to this point. This agenda is available on the city's website, and those of you in the room here have a hard copy in front of you. Let me just orient you to our game plan tonight, what we're going to cover, and then we'll just jump right into it. So doing updates, logistics, timeline, and let me just say real quickly on that. Ideally, we'll get most of our final discussion and decisions done this evening. If you do have any cleanup items, we'll negotiate at the end of this meeting whether or not you think we need to formally reconvene one final time. My hope is that we can put out a draft report for everyone's inputs or final revisions and then ultimately approval, so that that can make it into the commission packet for the December 19th City Commission meeting. So that's what I'm working towards, but you'll ultimately determine as a group what else any remaining needs that we have, and if we're ready to go with that. And the rest of the agenda for this evening, we're going to start off by talking about the complaint process, walk through our mapping. I'll say a little bit more about that when we get there. After we've gone through the complaint process mapping, we're going to look at all the steps involved. We're going to highlight both any proposed recommendations that you're putting forward to enhance that process, clarify that process. I'm also going to ask you to think about, from a public standpoint, external standpoint, does this make sense? Are the main steps obvious in the process to the general public that might wish to file a complaint? From there, we'll transition into discussion about the draft report development with a specific eye towards revisiting our multi-voting results and draft recommendations. So we need to confirm what we're recommending, do any kind of cleanup relative to that. We have both consensus recommendations that everybody's looking to put a green light to, go ahead to support. And then we have an additional set of recommendations that you individually have offered up that may or may not have risen to the level that would become a group recommendation. So we'll talk a little bit about that process as well. And then I'd like to get some confirmation on the report in terms of how the outline of it, the format, the general content areas, so we can pull all that together to get that into a draft form for your review. So that will be I need some specific direction from you relative to that. Make sure we're capturing everything that we need there. And if there's any other final decisions that you identify throughout this meeting, please flag those so that we're clear. Since we're an open, a public entity, public meeting here, we don't have the luxury of being able to make decisions and discuss outside of the time when we're convened formally as a group. And so we need to be really clear about what our role is relative to that. I would like to get all of this in a draft form by the end of this week. And so there's a lot of work that's been going on in terms of formatting and whatnot, but I need the final direction and decisions from you in all the areas that we learned tonight. And then I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about how do we prepare for the presentation to the commission. And then the final item on our agenda, number 4 there, next steps, is the completion of our tasks, which is to finalize the work group report and then present it to the city commission and then wrap it up. So that's our agenda for tonight. So we want to keep moving. Appreciate you being here. It's been a heavy lift. And so I want to be efficient with your time. Any questions on the agenda? Any concerns, anything that we're missing there? Okay. All right, very good. So what I would like to first have you do is focus on the complaint process mapping. And so just to refresh your memory on our project charter, first and foremost, the priority was for the work group to look at the complaint process, to map the current steps and identify recommendations relative to improvements to the CPRB's role relative to that. And so through the course of the discussion, we've had a presentation from the police department about the current complaint process. So we want to make sure that we're really clear on what that is, first of all, and that we're able to map it in a way that makes sense to anybody out in the community without the burden of having to know every single detail. But we also want to have that level of detail that is consistent with the ordinance as written, with the complaint policy as currently established by the department. And so we're going to clarify that process And then that's going to end up in the form of a graphic in the report so that all the steps in the process are clear and that the graphic also illustrates the basic or the principal steps involved if you were to file a complaint and if that were to be appealed and reviewed by the CPRB. So that's where we'll begin. And what I'd like to do just to kind of prime your thinking is I have taken at the August 14th work session, as you'll recall, the police department did a presentation. Their PowerPoint is on the community engagement portal for this work group now, that had all the steps of the complaint process to it. And so I have taken that and with your inputs, put it into a working document just to guide our discussion tonight. And that will all get rolled up into the draft report this week. And so to prime your thinking, I'd like for you to take that and review it, familiarize yourself with it. And I'm going to give you a few minutes at your table to begin talking about that. And then we're going to walk through it together as a group. So in front of you, there is a document here. And if you need a copy, and this is the current flow of the complaint process as articulated in the and this is exactly as taken from the presentation that the department did for us at our August 14th meeting and aligned with the current ordinance that establishes the CPRB's role relative to the complaint process. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to refamiliarize yourself with it, because some of you maybe haven't looked at it in a while. And then I've got some specific questions to walk you through to make sure that we are clear on this and that we can get the mapping that we need. And to prompt your conversation, first of all, just review it, see if there's any questions that you have, if there's anything that you feel like we need to do more discussion about specifically, flag that. And I'll give you just a few minutes in your small group, and then we'll discuss it as a full group. Now, also just note, for those of you who currently serve on the CPRB, starting at number 7, on the fourth page is the breakdown of the current appeals process steps. And so I want to make sure that that's accurate, but we've not captured that in this format yet before. So on our table, we're going through. And. Okay, so let's walk through this together and make sure that we've got everything. And then, let me ask you to be thinking about this in two ways. So one, we need a detailed description of the steps involved, make sure that this is an accurate reflection of the current process. The second thing is, be thinking about what are the major steps to the process from the public facing side of this. If you're to say, if I have a complaint, this happens first, this is typically what happens next. And because that's what's going to inform our mapping itself in the graphic relative to that. So if I have a complaint, in which to file a complaint, currently, what are the various ways that that complaint can be filed?
I through X.
Yeah, so there was a whole list of ways that were identified. So via email, phone, or in person to the Office of Professional Accountability in the department, via email, phone, or in person to the department's executive officer for diversity, by filling out a form online. A paper complaint form is available at the police headquarters as well in a public area of the facility. By calling the Douglas County Emergency Communications Center, non-dispatch, non-emergency line, and asked to speak with a non-duty supervisor. Through private message on the department's social media pages on Facebook or Twitter. Through any member of the police department, contacting the city manager's office, contacting a city commissioner, contacting the City of Lawrence Community Police Review Board, and contacting the Kansas Attorney General's office.
So, Roman numeral 9, contacting the City of Lawrence Community Police Review Board. I guess I would suggest adding to that, or any member thereof, because I think the ordinance is pretty clear that a person could make a complaint through any board member they wanted, individually, if they wanted to.
You mean a member of the CPRB itself?
Yes.
Yeah. And so how is that different than what's written here?
It says, contacting the board. That, in my mind, implies that they have to show up at a meeting to do it. Or somehow contact,
Oh, I
what
see.
is the board? When it's much more likely, they're going to see a board member's email address, name and email address on the city's website, and send an email to one or more of the board members, which is allowed. I think that's one proper way to do it. So I would suggest adding to the review board or any member thereof.
Okay, is that everybody good with that to clarify?
Yeah. But I'd say any member of board, because I think one of the things that we didn't want in the public comment section of it is to go air your complaint at the public forum. So I think any member of comes before. Same wording. just-
Yeah. Okay.
If they showed up at a meeting, then yeah, they're probably gonna be feeling like they've gotta say who they are, identify themselves and what their complaint is in a public meeting. That's right.
And just to clarify, because I thought I was trying to track where you're coming from with this, just to clarify. You're speaking specific to the CPRB, which is the standing committee in place to serve that function, not members of this group here.
Right.
Because we're an ad hoc work group that is a time limited task force. So, this group, you as members of this group can't receive the complaint if, unless it's in your other official capacity. So 3 of you in the room now are also members of the CPRB. So you have that responsibility and that ability to receive complaints and then pass it on accordingly. And just so while we're on the subject, your responsibility is if the public came to you directly as a member of the CPRB to report a complaint, what is your responsibility? What are you to do with that complaint?
Get it to the police department within 3 days.
Okay.
Now, my one experience with receiving a complaint was it was a complaint with so little detail that I sent the link to the form, you know, to flesh out the detail, and suggested that they just then forward that form to the police department. But that is somewhat at odds with a recommendation that we will get to eventually of completing a form as opposed to making an oral or informal complaint in all these many options.
Okay.
The department already receives them, and we also thought it important to collect demographic information, which none of this requires.
Okay.
But just pointing out the inconsistency between the recommendation and what exists.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's exactly where we need to clarify. So that's one of the reasons why we're gonna have this conversation. So just to name that, is there a physical form required or involved? And that demographics question. So we'll come to that here very shortly.
Yeah, so we're talking about the complaint right now, and the police department accepts verbal complaints without anything in writing.
Yeah,
So I think our obligation, even if it's just a verbal complaint we get, we probably need to alert the Office of Professional Standards of it. And with any identifying information we have. Yeah, okay.
okay, so flag that because we'll circle back to that in just a few minutes when it comes to recommendations specific to that. And then also the demographics question related to that. Okay, and that, just to clarify that if the CPRB member were to feel that the responsibility is to forward that within 3 days, 3 business days of receiving. Okay. So from there, that's the file of the complaint. The next step 2 is the complaint allegation. So the intake of that, the individual has an experience as an officer. Okay, and then in the presentation, we've heard description of level 1 complaints, level 2 complaints, and level 3 complaints, and with this definitions therein. And so this is all spelled out in the draft here that will be included in the report, so that what's clear meets a level 1, meets a level 2, and meets a level 3. From there, it's the investigation. And we're gonna come back and we're gonna do a dive on level 1, 2, and 3. So let me just get through the rest of the stuff here. The investigation, then, and we, in our presentation, we learned the level investigator for level 1 complaints, and the level 2 complaints and level 3 complaints, and who has to sign off on each of those items accordingly. And from there, the resolution, the recommendations of the findings, the definitions of either the sustained, not sustained, exonerated, unfounded, closed. And then the flagging of whether it's a training issue or a policy deficiency accordingly. And then lastly is the accountability systems relative to that, the internal systems of accountability, and who signs off on each type of complaint, level 1s, level 2s, level 3s, and then the external systems of accountability, which includes District Attorney of Douglas County Municipal Court, the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, Kansas Attorney General's Office, Kansas Supreme Court, and U.S. District Court, District of Kansas. Okay, then the last piece of this is if a complaint's been filed, it's been investigated, the department has issued a finding, the complainant has been notified of that finding, and it is specific to racial or other biased policing practices that can currently be appealed to the CPRB. And at that point, the appeal process with the CPRB, and this is, I want to make sure that this is captured accurately here as well, is step A. If the complainant is unsatisfied with the findings, they have 14 days upon receipt of that receipt of the findings from the police department. They have 14 days in which they could appeal that finding to the CPRB directly. At that point, let's talk through what happens if the CPRB were to receive an appeal. So the board, this is B, board will review the department investigation of the complaint to determine if further investigation is needed, unless such review is otherwise prohibited by federal, state, or local laws or federal state law enforcement regulations. The board will conduct its review confidentially in executive session, but doesn't do its own investigation. Okay, any questions up to that point?
Well, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, please.
Seems to me that the term complainant somehow needs to be defined at this point, because a complainant can be anyone under the process where the police department investigates it. But when it gets to this stage, the complainant must be a person who was involved in the event or was harmed as a result of the event. So that's a distinction that isn't clear in this, but that's been made clear in the operations of the board. So I was suggesting here that adding to A, instead of 14 days of learning of the department's findings, I think it would be more accurate to say within 14 days of receipt of notification.
Is that how it currently is?
That's how it's written in the ordinance. And there could be a distinction between what the ordinance says now, which is notification of receipt versus learning of the department's findings.
Of course, it doesn't say how that notification takes place.
Right, no, it doesn't. But we're only describing our present ordinance here. And then after that, to get the point across about the complainant having to have been involved in the incident, I would suggest adding those who were not involved in the incident or did not incur harm or injury as a result of the incident cannot appeal the police department findings to the board.
I would say anyone who lacks firsthand knowledge, because a citizen who witnesses something is harmed in a sense.
Well, perhaps, yeah, I mean. If that issue came up, we probably have to vote on it. And that opinion might prevail, but the wording I've used is from the advice that we got from
Sure.
the city, so that's why I use that language.
Can you repeat it, please?
Those who were not involved in the incident or did not incur harm or injury as a result of the incident cannot appeal the police department findings to the board. Now, the absurd example of that, and I agree, it's kind of absurd, but I guess we had it happen, is someone looking at the internet in New Zealand decided they wanted to appeal or file a complaint. I don't know which it was. Not having been involved in it at all, perhaps they viewed parts of it on the internet from a body camera or something. But
Okay,
that's
so,
kind of the rationale that brought it up, I think.
okay, so this is helpful. So let me just make sure I'm tracking on all of this so we capture it. That we need to clarify at this point in the step of the appeals process, who is eligible to file an appeal. So we need to build out the language on that here. In terms of defining complainant, we had some earlier discussion that when an individual files a complaint, it's an individual filing a complaint. At what point does the term complainant come into play? And do we need to be defining that earlier in this process?
Well, and do we need to be defining the police department's process? Presumably, once we have recommendations on an ordinance, if that is passed, then they will make their process conform to that. And right, as I understand it, but what we're talking about right now is police department policy, not ordinance.
Not recommendations.
Right.
Yeah. So is there anything that needs to be clarified here, or is that beyond this work?
This is just the appeal process as it pertains to the CPRB.
Yes.
Okay. So not anything outside of that scope of racial and bias-based policing.
At step 7 here in this, that's when the CPRB rules kicks in. Everything prior to this was specific to.
But am
So I
I
just-
wrong? I'm sorry.
No, just saying, should it be clear that this is just the appeal process as it pertains to the CPRB? It's not, I mean,
But am I wrong in understanding that what you've done here is summarize the existing policy and practice of the police department? Nothing related to the ordinance or bylaws of the CPRB.
Right.
No, this covers, this covers the current
The,
ordinance.
starting with step 7 is inclusive of the CPRB's role.
It's the complaint process. So
Okay.
from filing of the complaint all the way through appeal. And what Dr. Turner, I think your question was, is can you appeal? Is there a different appeal process for complaints that are of things other than racial-based bias?
that would need to be included as well.
Sorry. Turner.
Well, you could go to the state, I guess.
But at this time, there isn't. The CPRB can only do racial and bias-based policing,
Right.
as it is right now.
That's why I'm confused about whether we are like summarizing what exists now or talking about what it should be.
So, yeah, let me clarify that, because we need to jump to our recommendations, because that's where the meat of our work is. We are tasked both with mapping the current process and with producing recommendations for improvements on the appeals process. So what I'm trying to do just confirm is that we've got an accurate reflection of the current process here. But I want to get to where you want to get to, because
Right.
That's where we're adding value.
Spent a lot.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, okay.
when, all we're really asking is this what exists now?
Is there anything else,
But if we've got to accurately describe it here,
yeah.
so that you can see the differences that you might want to pick.
One of the things that I observed after the presentation is that there isn't currently a clear mapping of where the CPRV picks up from the complaint process. And so that's the immediate lift for us is just to make sure that these steps that we're talking about right now are clear. And then I want to get right into the recommendations on enhancements.
Hey, John, on 6.
Yeah.
It is all, those are all correct people, but I think you said something about they have to sign off. There's certain people that have to sign off. Those are people that are likely or potentially highly likely to be involved. So I just wanted to clarify that so that I didn't write that in there incorrect.
Yeah, thank you. In the PowerPoint slide presentation, as you recall, it indicated in investigations who has responsibility to sign off at certain steps and who otherwise would do that. So we need to make sure that that's reflected in here. So thank you for that.
Are you saying step 6 has inaccuracies or you want to highlight?
It's not inaccurate. If in the presentation, for example, like on level 1, or level 1, both 1 and 2 are correct, but only 1 has to physically sign off on it. Does that make sense?
Right,
Yeah.
this is just showing the folks that are involved in decision making.
Yeah, and
And
what I was
so-
clarifying that those are the normal people that would be involved, right? But if the major's gone, he's just gone. We make a decision without him, right?
Yeah, so what
There's
I'm-
people highlighted on there that say who
Okay.
is required to sign
yeah,
on the
so
presentation.
if you when you pull up the slide, you'll recall there were names that were highlighted in red, and those are ones that there's a required sign off as part of the current investigation process. And so we're gonna make sure that that's clear when you read through the steps involved. The other thing I just wanted to note that you said earlier was that we need to clarify that it's upon receipt of the department's findings of the investigation instead of learning out. So I noted that as well.
Where's that?
On step 7A. Needs to read instead of within 14 days
of receipt
of
notification.
receipt of notification.
Mhm. And those who are not involved in the incident or incurred harm or injury as a result of the incident cannot appeal the findings to the court.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So then you would do, since we're talking current state, then you would do the graphics that they have currently in place from the presentation that was given. Because I'm looking at the graphics now, right? So will that also be added into this?
Yeah, into the report. Yep. Yeah,
It
so,
won't look exactly like that, but it'll be similar.
Okay.
okay, I want to get through the rest of these so we can circle up to our recommendations. So, let's see. 7, so within 14 days of receipt, we clarified, those who were not involved, that qualifying language there. 7B, board will review the police department investigation of the complaint, determine if further investigation is needed. Anything on B, C, D, or E that we need to clean up? Is that all clear? Consistent with what we understand of the current appeals process is relative to CPRD. We good there? Okay. If there are any members, anything else that you want to highlight there? Okay, so now what we need to do is let's talk about the recommendations that you're putting forward. So at the August 28th meeting, we did a multi-domain exercise. I asked you to be thinking about what is important to you that you think needs to be considered by the full group as a potential recommendation. And we started that process looking specifically at complaints. So I'm going to ask you to pull the other working draft document and look specifically at potential recommendations that you're wanting to put forward relative to the complaint process. And then let's bring it full circle to our current mapping and make sure that we've captured everything that we need to.
Well, then we need another copy, if you have one more copy.
Future recommendations.
This was.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's right.
Do you need a moment? Unblemished?
Yeah.
Okay, I can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so what I want you to flag is any recommendation relative to the complaint process. And we want to make sure that, that it is reflected in our proposed recommendations for improvements to the process and the mapping. And in the report, we're gonna list the consensus recommendations that you all have green lighted and said that this needs to be included. And then we're also gonna flag recommendations that some of you put forward that did not achieve group consensus, and we'll spend just a few minutes talking about what that means in terms of the final recommendations for the report.
How are we doing that? You don't have a table? I'm saying yes or no.
Now, I just want you to. I was giving 5 minutes.
Don't have a question.
I'm paying attention, I promise. I just wasn't sure what the action was.
So we have green, we have got this color code system. We have green, which is generally, it's agreed upon, right? We have yellow, that is just blown out there, not generally agreed upon. I feel like a lot of the reds are just agreed upon, they're just in the negative, right? Isn't that what that's saying? It's like, we're not going to do that. So like, here are the things that are in general agreed upon.
Yeah, so this, okay, let's jump ahead and talk through this because we're gonna need that context to have this conversation. Okay, so just to refresh your memory, when we last met, we had asked you to submit possible recommendations from your discussion and from your experience as an individual member of the work group. We asked you to submit ideas that you thought should be discussed as a work group so that we could determine ultimately what recommendations as a full group you wanted to put forward to the city commission. So to do that, we compiled a lengthy list which amounted to 47 different ideas. And then we did a multi-voting process, which is a process for being able to build consensus or determine consensus around individual items. And so to refresh your memory here, you were given a pack of green, yellow, and red dots. We wrote each of the 47 ideas up here, and some of these were just more in the idea phase, not necessarily as fleshed out as others. But then we asked you to weigh in with either a green dot, yellow dot, or red dot. A green dot indicated that you supported that as a recommendation and that you thought it should be considered by the group as one of the recommendations put forward to the city commission. A yellow dot indicated that you had some questions or concerns, and in most cases were otherwise leaning in the direction of supportive, but not necessarily. And we'll clarify that. And then if you were to put a red dot up, and we didn't have any on our first several recommendations, but a red dot indicated that either you did not support that or thought it shouldn't be recommended or just thought it was a bad idea in a number of ways. So each of you weighed in on each of the 47 possible recommendations that were the cumulative effort of the group. And from that, what I have attempted to do is to put this into groupings based on the distribution of your dots. And so one of the major lifts that we have tonight is I need confirmation on, are these an adequate and accurate reflection of what you're wanting to put forward as recommendations? So I'll tell you the logic that I used, and I asked for input from you on this, so I want to make sure that it lines up. But what I've attempted to do is I've gone through here, and for every possible recommendation of the 47 ideas that you generated, if it had all green, then that is a consensus recommendation that everybody in the group is saying, yes, we think that's a great recommendation to put forward to the city commission. And we got a bunch of those. We also had some recommendations where you had almost all greens and maybe one or two or maybe three yellows. And so on some of those, as you'll recall in our discussion while we were doing the multi-voting, we spent a few minutes doing a deeper dive, and some of you were weighed in on what your cautionary note was, why you chose a yellow. And some of that fleshed out and became a more nuanced version of what ultimately was a consensus recommendation. But on other issues, you held true and said, I'm not ready to vote green on that because I still got these other concerns that need to be addressed. So we need to clarify a few of those this evening, and I'll highlight those as we go through. The second grouping that I am asking you to reflect on is those recommendations that were a majority yellow and or possibly had more yellows than greens, and in a rare instance might even have one red. And so those I'm offering up to you as what I called possible recommendations. And you're going to weigh in on whether or not they rise to the level of a recommendation to the city commission or not. The feedback that I heard from you all is that these 47 ideas were important to you. You came up with it for a reason, and you were advocating accordingly. And so what we were attempting to do in the report to the city commission is to include all 47, but have a really obvious demarcation of what is a consensus recommendation and what is just an idea that's being put forward. Because some of you felt very strongly that even though you got outvoted, you still want the commission to be thinking about that for a whole number of reasons. And so I got that message. Okay, the last grouping, so that middle group I called possible recommendations. The last grouping would be examples of items where somebody proposed it, somebody thought it was a good idea in the group, but when it came time to do the multi-voting, the majority of folks said, no, we don't think it's a good idea, it's not gonna work, or we don't support it. And so I put those in a category temporarily, I just called them no non-recommendations or no recommendations. And if you have a better way to say that, let me know. But these are items where one or two people maybe felt strongly about it, but the majority of the group definitely didn't think it should be a recommendation or were adamantly opposed to the idea. And so that's captured as another category.
I wouldn't say no recommendation, I'd say unpopular recommendation or something along those lines, because we've decided that each of us put forth ideas that we wanted to be considered. The group had a chance to consider it. We understand that some of them might be no's for now based on popular voting trends, but it could be that later on in the process, that idea, we don't want it to get lost, because it might find traction at a later point in time. If all the other things are met, maybe it could be considered. And we wanted to make sure that that goes before the commission.
One thing that Dr. Turner and I think bounced back and forth was the idea of consensus versus non-consensus recommendations.
Yes.
With yellow still could just be possible. Kind of up in the air, it's hard to quantify. half consensus, but also kind of not half consensus. The greens are consensus, everyone pretty much agreed. And then the reds were no consensus, but it's still a possible recommendation if the city looks at and says. Let me find the first one, that the window for appeals should be extended, 6-4-2. It was a non-consensus recommendation, but the city might look at it and be like, that's a great idea, we're doing it. And so that's why we had all 47 recommendations made it into this. I know it makes it a 10-page long recommendation section. But the idea was also to have a abstract, basically, of the recommendation section that's like, here are the consensus recommendations, look to the rest of the section for every other recommendation. So that way, a person reading it, the city can look and be like, oh, here's the 20 that we know the work group pretty much agreed on. Let's go from there.
Yes.
That was something that's going to be put in as an abstract that lists those consensus ones. So be it if it's a long report overall, but there's going to be sections within it that make it more digestible.
Yeah, so thank you for that explanation. So is the logic behind the groupings of green, yellow, and red clear? And do you understand how we got to that? So what I'm hearing is green means consensus, so you're gonna put forward a bunch of recommendations that, and just to clarify, consensus means unanimous.
We can do consensus / majority consensus, because there are a few that have a yellow on there. So it's not technically everyone voted green.
Right.
And that.
Like when you look at your board right there, you've got,
Well,
Consensus just means we can live with it.
yeah,
So yellow
actually,
to me says, may not like it, but I can live with it.
so that's a really important definition. Like, what is the definition of consensus? It's, I support it, I can live with it. Do I love it? Probably not. Did I get everything in it that I wanted? No. But am I signing my name on to say, yes, we'll put this forward? I'm in. So that's what consensus is. Consensus does not mean you got everything you want. It means that you had ample opportunity to weigh in. Your questions and concerns were addressed through the process, and that ultimately you're generally supportive of that recommendation.
So I would not consider any of the yellow to be a consensus.
That's,
Well, we have to work through it.
that's exactly, so that's what needs to be decided is, as we look at these, and that's exactly why we left this kind of middle category. Because as you pointed out, maybe the commission down the road says, let's take this up. Because some of these, there was a yellow sticker because it would be a really heavy lift. And we knew that it was beyond the work here. But that kind of gives us that middle ground, if you will.
so then why don't we just have two categories, consensus and non-consensus?
That's the other possibility. So, I didn't want to leave about the red mark, the red dot
I was,
saying, several of you commented you didn't like the term no recommendation. You'd rather have it say
No consensus.
no consensus or unpopular. So the other way to format this is either you have consensus or you don't have consensus.
But that would make the yellow, which it would turn all the yellows to red.
Why don't we, when we didn't have time to talk through any of these.
Right.
So all we did was throw stickers on, so the
Yeah.
yellows for me are things we need to talk through more, and we may come to consensus.
But we're not gonna be able to do that.
Okay.
That's what we're giving you very soon.
We stop,
Okay. Very
do all
soon.
this, we start moving, we can.
We just have we have to decide what our process is.
See, I thought we were done advocating positions, but.
Yeah.
This group's never done that.
okay, so that I withdraw my suggestion, and I think we continue with the green, yellow, red.
So I actually agree with her first suggestion, and this group has done a lot of great work to get onto consensus, right? From places that we weren't, so let's be strong there. This group recommends that you do this, everybody, or, I even agree that it was 90% is recommending that, let's show this good work. On the same token, people's ideas are important, so we flesh those out. I don't like the term recommendation, but it's other items considered or ideas considered, something like that. But let's be strong on what the work of that we all did together is.
Yeah,
And we agreed upon.
And we agreed upon, right?
Absolutely.
And it's way further than we ever have been on board. So let's be strong about it.
Well, that was exactly my thinking was green, make it clear consensus. And then I was giving you an out because I see a real difference between those that have a bunch of yellows, but no reds. And those that have a lot of reds. That's a pretty significant difference. So the three categories can give you that.
You could do items requiring further study
For the red.
for the yellow.
Yeah.
Those are
Okay.
possibles. We're not sure. Cause
Okay.
chief, there's 15 or 16 yellows. I don't know, in about an hour if we could get through those.
Not this group.
Okay.
And so we can just items for further study, pass that to the city.
Do you, okay, so, there's an idea. So green means consensus. Yellow means
Items for
ideas
further
for further
study,
discussion. And red means.
non-consensus, no consensus,
Unpopular opinion,
unpopular, something.
Less popular.
unpopular opinion,
I was like, cause some of the reds were, there's,
unpopular.
well,
What do
yeah,
you-
but
what do
also
you think?
were.
Let's define it, unpopular. Or you want me to choose one?
It was like 4-1.
This-
I mean, is there gonna be commentary with each of these?
Yeah.
You had commentary that you sent to us,
Yeah,
but it's not here.
description, yeah.
Are we gonna deal with that commentary?
So what
Okay.
about proposed by at least one member, but not,
Well, okay, so the other thing is, in some consensus models, you never actually either get consensus or you don't. We are so conditioned in our democratic processes to vote. And when you vote, typically it's a majority rule, and the great thing about democracy and that democratic process is it's very clear. And we're very conditioned and we know majority rules and we move on. Consensus is a lot more difficult to do. First of all, it tends to take longer, but we're so conditioned to vote and look and count numbers at the end that we're uncomfortable if we don't have a final tally. And so this is a bit of a departure from that. But we did include the actual count of the dots in the draft, or I have so far. I've done consensus processes like this where they didn't want that. It was either green, yellow, red, and how you got there is how you got there, but.
I think with the acknowledgement that we're putting in everybody's ideas, all of them, that having the votes, or especially for those that are not consensus, because Harrison just pointed out that there was one that had 5 green dots, 1 yellow dot, and 5 red dots, and it's red on the list.
Yeah.
And so we did not have consensus, but I do think that that's something that the commission should, when they're looking over these, should take into consideration.
So you're arguing there's value in having the breakdown of the colored dots.
Yes, and that we move forward with the red, yellow, the green, yellow, red breakdown that's currently here, and that including the votes is the right step to do.
Because the votes by themselves contextualize the results and why the recommendation is a consensus item of further study or non-consensus recommendation. It's because this is the context, because I was talking about recommendation 1.2 on page 5, complaints should be received by the police and the CPRB at the same time. We had like a 45-minute discussion when we talked about that recommendation at some meeting or another. So not that it's unpopular, it's divisive.
Yeah.
And the city should know, oh, this was actually very divisive.
Yeah.
It was a split vote.
Okay, everybody good with that? That's good.
So back to green being consensus, yellow being,
Items for further study.
and then red being
Non-consensus.
non-consensus or no consensus.
Or no.
And then
Okay, everybody good with that? All right, so that's the logic behind that. The last thing I'll just say is, these were listed in the order in which you discussed them. There was a logic to it in that we started with the complaint process. So all of the recommendations are listed first on specific complaint process. Then it pivots to board scope, CPRB recommendations related to board scope. That was your second big bucket of focus, if you will, and then the third was board structure. And when we got into membership and training and all of that. So they're written in the way that they are. The numbering, I think you followed my logic there, but every green under the complaint process was 1.1, then 1.2, 1.3. A yellow under the complaint process is yellow 1.1, 1.2, and then red is its own 1.1. Then when you get to board scope, it's 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and then board structure is 3.1, 3.2. Everybody good with that? That's the way they organize that.
It makes total sense. I love your memory. But again, it's a weak presentation. If we come up and go, we agreed here, we didn't agree here, we kind of agreed here. Let's talk about what we agreed on first.
Yeah,
Like,
so
let's go green. Let's go show all the work that we did.
I agree with that. I like
absolutely.
doing my.
So here's my other suggestion. I would like to include or suggest that we include in the report an executive summary that is listed before the detailed parts that just lists all the green recommendations. For that very reason, because it's much more compelling, say boom, 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 boom. That's
As far as the infographics that we're doing, though, we would just be using the greens. Right? Because that's the consensus. So when we're mapping the process.
Oh, yeah.
It would just be the greens. It wouldn't include the yellows or the
Well,
reds,
yeah.
or should it?
Yeah, let's jump in and decide that here as we look at the specifics. Is everybody all right with that? The idea of executive summary is just the greens. We lead with that, and you pull in all the rest later. Okay, that's very good. Okay, thank you. That's very tedious, but it's important because this is.
Executive summary.
Executive summary is just the greens, and we lead with that. So these are our recommendations.
And for the infographic, just the greens, or
Yes.
greens and yellows? Just greens?
Let's look at the specifics and decide that.
Okay.
Okay, so
Consensus?
Further stuff?
Significant support. And. No consensus. I mean,
Significant
I know, but
you're talking on
a lot of the
inside
other.
the mapping?
Well, I'm talking about yeah, how this is laid out, keeping the notion of the three categories. But, you know, some of this to me seems kind of arbitrary. You've got 10 green dots and a couple of yellows and one red, well, 9 green dots, 2 yellows and 1 red. Then it comes out yellow because one person opposed.
Right, right.
So
Yeah, if you feel strongly about any of them, I leaned on a couple of you to help kind of organize that as an initial attempt. If you read that and you find that you didn't get it right, let's talk about that, like flag that, but.
Dr. Turner and I basically had to develop a bright line. And our bright line was, if it has a red, that means someone was very strongly opposed to it, put it yellow. Because even though, you still got the 10 green votes, it was one of those things where we just made a choice to make that and let it be to the rest of the work group. If that you're like, no, don't do that, put it as green. Okay.
But, well, that's why I'm suggesting the 3 categories.
Yeah.
There's consensus, there's strong support with some opposition. Versus.
Yeah.
Yeah, just not.
Yeah,
So you want to change yellow to strong support? You want yellow to be called strong support?
Well, significant group support something, because. Then we're almost getting into
Strongly
categories
considered.
where you
Yeah, no,
got pretty much split.
I think I've got where you're wanting to go with that. I think the food structure is good. And plus, we'll pull all this into a draft and circulate it to you. So if you're like, oh my gosh, that totally missed it, then you'll have a chance to weigh in. I think I'm tracking it.
Right, I mean, just because one person is strongly opposed doesn't make the fact that 11 people really like the idea.
But the commission will see that when because we're
Right.
putting a vote.
Okay, so we need to keep moving here.
I just want to say I really like significant support. I think that captures what we're trying to say.
Okay,
But I agree
Not
that red,
consensus, but significant support.
right, and then red would stay non-consensus.
all right. It's been. And you know, if we meet through the end of January,
Oh, good God.
we can actually get
A riot on your hand?
all 47 to that granularity.
No, we're gonna thank you so much. I find a little bit of wiggle.
All right, okay, here,
Then the commission can ignore us anyway.
okay. In your draft list of recommendations, focus on the complaint process. I want you to look at only the green ones. And we're gonna just walk through and make sure that we capture all of the green ones are reflected as consensus recommendations for improvements to the complaint process and or the appeals process.
But we're not voting.
No, I just I wanna name them,
Okay.
and I wanna see if there's any that there's any questions about, but I think it's pretty clear. It was really nice to see when you started doing the multi-voting, there were a ton of greens right off the bat in this section, so there was a lot of consensus around improvements. I just wanna make sure that we were clear on them so that we can finish this out. So as you look at those, any questions, anything we need to discuss? Are you good with all the greens under the complaint process?
There are some greens we are already doing, and this makes it sound like we need to start doing that. So I think some clarity around that would be important as well.
So, yeah, thank you for that, because I noticed that in our discussion. How. And I think that there are some things that have been introduced within the context of CPRB meetings as practices. That have been improvements to the process, but haven't necessarily been codified in ordinance revisions.
I'm talking about things that are in our policy that
Okay.
we're already doing, that this is saying we should do this, or we should, to me, I would feel better if it said the department should continue to do this.
Okay,
We're already doing it.
And it should be incorporated into the new ordinance.
I don't agree with that.
oh, okay,
Well, but that's what this is for.
No,
well.
no, this is not about putting a policy in the ordinance because you can't. I mean, there's no other departments that have their policy. in the
Well,
ordinance.
then it's not enforceable. Other than through the department.
We're tackling several different things at once. Some of which will have to end up in some ordinance down the road. Some of it is simply documenting what the current process is, and some of it's recommendations, which may or may not take the form of.
We're on to recommendations now.
Yeah.
But some of these are recommendations
So
about the
let me-
complaint policy. And
So
what I'm
let me
saying
ask
is,
you this, could you flag for us, because that's a level of detail I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Could you flag for us which ones are you're currently doing that the language of the recommendation just needs to be tweaked? That would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, because there was one in particular that I thought that would be the case.
there's several actually when I was looking through there.
Okay, that
I
would be
think
helpful.
so, when we were doing the complaint process, we were talking about what we wanted to see it from beginning to end.
Uh-huh.
So there's going to be some overlap. I don't think it was all perspective. I think we were just trying to encapsulate an entire process.
Okay,
So, yeah, and I think when we look at, because we just went through what the current process is, I think where it overlaps, we could just italicize it really. Just to show that this is needs to be spoken to so that it is incorporated in our recommendations for an overall process, why it fits in there, but not that it wasn't previously being done.
Yeah, like the second one, complainants should be allowed at least one support person. That's already in the policy.
And the dialogue that you had says that, I think.
That it's in there currently.
Well, you say that it's already their policy, but you say it should be incorporated into the ordinance.
So does, is there language in that recommendation that needs to be changed that's reflected?
No, I'm agreeing with the recommendation. What I'm saying is we already allow, our
Okay,
current policy allows somebody to have a support person.
okay,
It can just be a notation that
Something that
says,
the full, just rephrase.
I'm saying the department
so,
continue to allow someone to have a support. person.
so one thing I need from all of you to do is there will be like a short 1 or 2 sentence, in some cases it was 3 or 4 sentences narrative that provides context for that recommendation. So I'd like, when you get a draft report, please take the time to read those to make sure that it's reflective of this kind of discussion.
Right, because here's what's gonna happen is, we'll have these recommendations, and then the commission will say, yes, we should do these things. And then Clark's gonna call me and say, you guys need to start doing these, when are you gonna start doing them? And I'll have to say, we've already been doing
And it's
it.
already.
It creates confusion
Okay.
because we're, so I think this, and if it's in the clarifying stuff underneath, okay, the department's already doing this, then that answers that.
Okay,
we can
Because
put a footnote that says, Kate, the Lawrence Police Department is already doing this.
Yeah,
The,
just something like
the worker recommends they continue doing this.
yes.
so,
That's-
so everything.
I wanted
that-
to bring that up to the group though, to make sure that we had consensus on it.
Yeah,
Because
that's
it's just
good.
one person saying that, and then you all are like, hey, wait a minute, that's not what we recommended. So,
So anything that's currently written as a recommendation says, you should be doing this, that you're already doing.
yes,
We'll clean up that language and then it will be noted within the narrative.
thank you.
Okay,
So to speak to your consensus is, I'm looking at page 4, and I can't go with 1.6. I agree with it. I don't know whether I put green or yellow or to do data, demographic data. With the caveat that some people will not give you demographic data
Okay.
or complaints are anonymous. So you can't have a shall without a, doesn't always apply.
okay, so let's talk about that. So one of the recommendations,
The form shall request demographic information.
I thought. What do we need to decide on that? We need to remedy that. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay, include demographic data to enable tracking of trends or patterns. So just to refresh your memory here, the concern was, what if someone has an isolated complaint? It's investigated, it's resolved, and somehow people become aware that that similar isolated complaint has appeared 2 or 3 and 4 times. And in fact, there appears to be a possible pattern that everybody who had a similar complaint also happened to be a woman, for example.
When we
And-
had that conversation, there was, I believe it was Alex was saying, putting it at the bottom of a form instead of at the top. And we got into a conversation at that time that we didn't want to get to that level of granularity with our recommendations. And so I agree that must and shall should have balance. I think when we're talking about must and shalls as it's written in the recommendation, that if there is a possible problem, we can acknowledge it in the comments. So to the point for recommendation 1.6 in the comments, it should say on the form, it should be located or something to that point.
But we could always say prefer not to answer.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like when or when
It's
applicable, when you can, because some people won't even give you their name, let
It's a-
alone their demographic information.
So the recommendation is that that the option to identify is included,
Yes,
but it's optional. As we, anything else.
I mean, everything is optional.
All right, good. Okay, so that's clear. What else do you see under consensus recommendations, green, under the complaint process?
The complaint form with the diagram on the complaint form. Just makes for a little bit more. I think we've said diagrams available, but like there or something, but it just makes for.
Yeah.
Have it on the website, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's clarify. So the diagram is the mapping, and the idea is that that could be let appear on the website. It could appear if there's like a brochure or something, if there's a public education document created, flyer or something that the department puts out, that's where it's included. That same thing, are we saying that graphic needs to be included on the form, or you're saying
That's what it says in here.
Complaint form should be redrafted with the diagram of the complaint process included and be written in plain language.
And let me ask you, did you all feel like our complaint form wasn't in plain language?
No, that part of the conversation was just about it being accessible to folks that,
Okay.
might not have, strong literacy skills or might have English as a second language.
So if we can translate into other languages,
Yeah,
but I guess where I am, because I'm in the forest, I
Yeah.
can't see the trees, so you all aren't police. If, when you read that form, did you feel like it was plain language, or do we need to make it more plain?
I didn't review it with that light. I need to take a
If
look
you
at
all
it.
would not mind, if you all could do that between now and, it's not a long form. Just take a look at it and let us know if it's clear.
Yeah, I think that's a really important outcome from this, is we need to make sure that it's accessible, and part of accessibility means plain language.
Yeah, it's
That makes
very,
sense.
because most of it is a narrative form where they're writing what they feel like happened.
Okay, so if you all would do that, just read through the form. This is getting into a level of granularity too, but in terms of the recommendation is an emphasis on plain language and clear process. And we're wanting to build confidence that it's a good process and that the process is followed consistently. But does the graphic need to be on the form itself?
I have
Yes,
to
thanks.
agree with Skylar on that the graphics doesn't have to be a part of form. Right?
I agree.
It's gonna appear in other places. But not
It
so.
doesn't have to be a part of the form. It will make it very long.
What else on complaint process, consensus recommendations? Anything else?
I do have suggestions for the form. How do I get those to you?
If you'll email them to, email them to Jonathan, you have Jonathan's number, just shoot
Okay.
those to us, and we'll get those. Or if you have my email, just email them to me.
It's largely changing some of the, like complainant information to your information. Did you receive a ticket? Did you do jail time? Something, because not everybody understands where I cited. Did you receive a ticket?
Okay.
Did you have to, go to jail? Were you processed?
Yeah, just shoot that stuff, to me,
Something like that.
and we'll make sure we'll get that in there.
There's just anecdotally, I've worked with some other local governments. There's some really good work being done around plain language on forms. And I worked on a project where they used plain language on court notifications. And they had a huge problem with no-shows at municipal court. And when they went and did some research on why people wouldn't show up, a big driver was actually they didn't understand or they were intimidated by the summons or the language on the correspondence. And once they cleaned it up, people started showing up more. And it was strictly plain language that was one of the major remedies. So, I will just say this, that gets into a level of detail a little bit beyond what we're scoped to be able to do as this work group. But I absolutely want to lean on the city and the department that this is a big deal and it's important, and that we want to make sure that this group puts forward great recommendations, but we want to make sure that the department carries that forward to make it a reality and those kind of finished documents that are a reflection of the good work here. So, all right. Anything else on complaint process? All right, so we're gonna have a whole set of consensus recommendations. You wanna just read them off real quick so we can confirm that? They wanna read them? We're good. You know what they are, we're good? All right, so that's all green. These are all in the notes that will go out.
Recommend the reading.
Lots where we go read it in there, you know. There's a light.
Okay. All right, next, let's do this. If you need to get up and stretch, do that. Grab one thing of, drink, cherry soup, whatever, do what you gotta do. 3-minute break to get up and stretch, and then we're gonna pivot to the next group of recommendations. Back. All right. So thank you for that. Doing some great work here. So we've already identified a whole bunch of the consensus recommendations. That is all going to go into a draft report that will then circulate. And so thank you for yet another heavy lift on that. Okay, the next big bucket of items that we asked you to pose recommendations or ideas for recommendations on was specific to board scope. And so you generated those. We did a multi-voting exercise. I again leaned on 2 of your colleagues here to help navigate this in terms of green, red, or green, yellow, and red recommendations, and I appreciate the draft work that they did on that. And so now I just want to confirm what we've established there, identify what our green consensus items are, anything that we need to clarify and cover specific to this. Okay, so under board scope. So these are the big questions about what recommendations you're putting forward relative to the scope and authority of the CPRB. And we put in a lot of discussion about oversight versus review versus advisory. Those are the 3 broad categories, if you will. Whenever you talk about community oversight, falls in the realm of oversight, review, and advisory. And so we had a number of discussions and we looked at that from a few different angles. And when you put forward the recommendation, board serves in a review capacity, and that had strong consensus. There was 1 yellow within that, and everybody else was green on that. And so the recommendation put forward is that the board serves in a review capacity, reviews the appeals of the complaints. The next big category here is specific to the type of complaints. So a lot of the feedback that we heard leading into the creation of the work group, a lot of the public comment at CPRB meetings, a lot of the discussion that was generated during our community conversations, and a frequent theme that came up here is a recognition and frustration, as it's often expressed, that the current structure or ordinance and authority of the CPRB is exclusively tailored to the review of appeals, specifically only falling under the category of racial and other bias based policing. And that the feedback that we were hearing is that the CPRB should have the authority to look at a broader set of complaints than just racial or other bias-based policing. So the recommendation that came forward, it was phrased in different ways in your draft ideas for the group's consideration in the multi-voting. But as you'll recall, the police department presentation identified that there are level 1 type complaints, there are level 2 type complaints, and there are level 3 type complaints. And that the recommendation put forward to expand the review to include all level 1 complaints was a consensus recommendation where everybody felt that that was a good recommendation that they would be on, so that the CPRB's authority would be expanded to address any type of level one complaint that's appealed to the CPRB and could be reviewed. So with that, the definitions of level one complaints is in the presentation from the department and is reflected in the complaint process. Questions?
I have one question on this one.
Yes.
I just noticed this one has 7 green dots, which is not very many compared to some of the other ones. It has no yellow or red.
Right, so that was why I questioned it. I get the concept and the other ones, but I just wanted to, that one caused me concern.
We put in like the intro paragraph that not everything received 12 votes, because there are a couple others that received 10 or 11. I don't know why this one in particular only got
Yeah.
7, but
So I think we were starting to run out of dots. Like I can tell you, there's a couple things that if I saw like all green and I agree with it, I just walked away.
Okay.
Because,
Right.
yeah.
I just, that was my, I get the 10 or 11, 7 felt low, so.
I
But I feel like it doesn't have any yellows or reds, and so.
Good
I'm
response.
glad you, and just to clarify, I think we may have been doing some dot rationing at that point,
Yes, I
because there's actually one torn in half. And I remember that some of you actually, even though we
Okay.
have plenty.
Thank
that's
you.
Okay. Some of you put those up there. But just to confirm, we're saying that it's consensus recommendation that appeals of any level one type complaint would be within the recommended expanded authority of the CPR. Okay, so then level two complaints, and this was a little clunky the way it appeared on here, but level two, the second recommendation was level 1 and 2, excuse me, and that received mostly green and 2 yellow. And so I understood that based on our subsequent discussion that you were recommending that all level 1 complaints and level 2 complaints could be appealed to the CPRB. Is that an accurate assessment of the discussion? Okay, so we're saying that there's consensus that the board's authority to review appeals has been expanded to include all level 1 complaints and all level 2 complaints. Yes, okay, all right, that's what I need to. Thank you for that. Okay, and then they also put forward the recommendation that all level 1s, level 2s, and level 3 complaints would be part of the expanded authority for appeal, and that received a majority yellows and reds. There were 3 reds, there were 5 yellows.
5 green.
Oh, 5 greens and 5 yellows. And so that did not meet our definition of consensus or recommendation.
Correct.
Okay, so everybody's clear on that? All right, so that's a big one. That's probably that. You've got a lot of really important recommendations you're putting forward, and that's probably one of the more substantial ones of the expanded complaints. Okay, next we have offer recommendations to,
I think we can move on, that's
all green.
yeah, this is all green.
Yeah.
So let me direct your attention to the summation then. Are there any other consensus, all green, under board scope that you have questions about, concerns about, or are there any in the yellow that we need to spend a few minutes just clarifying?
I just keep wondering how 12 people got 13 votes.
I know, I noticed that on one of them. I
On
think part of it,
on 2.6.
Maybe somebody was just really enthusiastic about it.
That's a great election.
This is one of the reasons why I typically don't list the dot counting, because you've got messy ballots, you've got people. Everybody had at least 47 dots to work with, so.
Jonathan, I was curious to hear from the group, the CPRB's advisory role should focus on community engagement. Is that in addition to the overall purpose should serve in a review capacity, or are those? I didn't know if those were.
Page before at the top.
Okay,
That's essentially as a result of the review. Right. I mean, you don't overrule them, you just. Make a recommendation.
so let's talk about this, and if I were to do this over again, I would have listed these differently, because this it was a little bit of a mess in the way that the voting occurred on here, but nonetheless, we still need to clarify what we're saying by this. So in terms of the recommendation put forward was in the context of the advisory capacity or the advisory function, if you will, of the CPRB. Are we recommending that the CPRB has a role in doing community engagement relative to its work? And the consensus was yes, that there's a role in it. Okay,
And they're doing community engagement on their work,
Correct.
Yes.
not the police department.
Correct.
That's why all the other three are either yellows or reds,
Yeah,
because those are more focused on what the police should do with the community.
and I think that was some confusion with the CPRB, the way it is now, is they feel like they should be doing community engagement with the police department. And I think that what I heard in this group is this CPRB should be doing its own community engagement about the process of complaints, review, and those kinds of things.
Yes.
Okay.
But how do you review a department that you are also doing PR work for?
I mean, how are you perceived as a part?
It didn't seem to be a conflict, but that's the way it was understood by the CPRB, was we were working together to do community engagement, and that made sense to me.
And that's also why there's maybe a bit of a disconnect with like the CPRB's advisory role should focus on policy review being red. And then we have may offer advice or recommendations to the police chief. Also about identifying trends and patterns, because those are distinct from each other. We're not telling you, we're not helping you with policy review. We're telling you, hey, I want to look at this. Something's a little wonky. That's why there's that maybe a bit of a disconnect between those.
That helps clarify, I think, some of the grayness in their role right now, so I think that'll be helpful.
I think that also really came in our community conversations, even to the folks that were attending. There were a couple of tables that were like, are you guys all together? Like, do you work with the police? And it's like, and then, you know, kind of, well, how do you review the work if you are within? And how do we trust the review that you've done? And so making sure that that is listed is, I think, something that they really wanted to see.
I think it'll be helpful.
so the other outcome that I saw that might, there's a compare and contrast, if you will, is when asked about outreach, if it was promoting the department, that wasn't a consensus item, but if it's specific to engagement around the work of the CPRB, education around that there's a role. In the broad categories of scope, oversight, review, and advisory, or advisory for boards that have a primary role in advisory, they tend to skew much more heavily towards the community engagement and outreach functions. And so that's one of the things that I think you're clarifying here. Now, policy review, we need to make sure that your report and recommendations reflect as you just described that, because I think that was communicated communicated well. I want to make sure that that clarity is in the report. Because in our discussion, there has been, a range of perspectives and ideas about, for example, to what extent does the board have a role in reviewing policies, understanding existing policies, and making comments relative to that? And to what extent, I just want to make sure that we capture a clear description of that. Oh, that's probably just maybe. I don't know what I feel about that. Okay, so you got that, all right. And then on relationships, so we specifically asked, does the board have a role in cultivating positive relations with the PD, the police department, and the community? And that was what we say, that is not a recommendation.
And one of the notes in the writings that I took is that the police operating and like working with the CPRB is inherently an act of strengthening your relationship with the public. If you're willing to put yourself out as the police department and be subject to the community, then that is going to help build a relationship with that community.
Okay, anything else that we need to identify there or scope out there?
I would just add, clarifying that one in writing, just make sure that it's relationship between the public and the PD instead of relationship with the public alone.
I took a note on that.
Okay,
Okay.
does it not say? Okay. All right, all right, so the next, and everything else in terms of the red, yellow, or excuse me, green, yellow, red, and the recommendations for scope, we're good with everything else there. Okay, so now the last category was board structure. This is where we talked about member qualifications, recommendations on training, things to that effect. And what are the consensus? This was the areas I recall we have the fewest obvious consensus recommendations.
There were only two. The CPRB should be able to review race-based trends / data and review available local data. And then don't merge the CPRB with the Human Relations Commission, which the city council, the city commission has determined they will not make a decision on that until they read our report. So that's cool. That's great. I appreciate the city commission choosing to wait. But the yellows on this one, ultimately, most of them broke down to needing to know what this would look like in the future. So time limit on public comment, the city is redoing all their public commentary time. So we're like, well, do what you want to do here, I guess. The established training modules or courses, there's a lot of talk about what those would look like. It got very granular very quickly. That's up to the city to determine. There should be guidelines established for communication between the CPRB and the Lawrence Police Department. Again, that's basically harkening back to our very first meeting about how we communicated with each other. Those types of guidelines just should be set up or strengthened if they already existed. The qualification ones, so 3.4 on the yellows, the red 3.2, those had to do with one, potentially local ordinances and state laws that prohibit felonies from serving on certain people with felonies from serving on particular boards. So
CJIS information, they may be restricted to have access to that.
yeah, exactly. So those were questions that it was like the city legal can determine whether or not this recommendation is even workable. And then the data analysis, basically that and the no recommendation 3.3 about no active or retired police, it basically boils down to we should not have a requirement, but we should also not necessarily ban something from the board unless a city ordinance prohibits like a current police officer cannot serve on any city board, right?
Yeah,
It's any city, exactly. So those rules are kind of already determined. No, the recommendation 3.1, those pretty strongly, no, we can't do that. You have to be within the city scope, can't just exist as an independent third neutral party. The confidential information one, that has to do with, other issues outside the scope of the work group. Board members from 7 to 9, a lot of the concern was just that we can't fill it out now. I don't know if we can fill it out with 9, but there's also a conversation we had that after it's revisited, revised, the ordinance is changed, there may be more interest in joining. A new code of ethics, there's a city code of ethics, so there's a question of do they need their own special code of ethics? Which, determining on what other recommendations may be adopted by the city, may need to be implemented, but future looking. And then, yeah, don't merge the CPRB. Listed twice.
And I have a comment.
Yes, there was one recommendation that's no merge, and then a recommendation that says merge, so we voted the same way, just in different directions.
I wanna come back to that one, because we need to make sure we're clear on that, but before we get to that,
The first item under board structure seems to me it belongs under scope.
I agree.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, yeah,
So the proposed recommendation was the CTRB should be able to review race-based trends, data, and review available local data. And in reference to the available local data would impart the CJCC study and some related good work that's already out there.
Yeah.
Do you think does that make sense that should be listed under board scope as opposed to board structure?
that's a,
Harrison has made them.
Yeah,
made a note.
that makes sense.
We really don't have any recommendations under board structure, except not to merge with human relations.
No consensus ones, anyway. I think we had a lot of good recommendations, there's just a lot of questions that couldn't be answered by our work group. For various purposes, for various reasons.
I think that's,
Yeah.
but I think that helps with the fact that we're putting forth all of the recommendations to the commission. Not committee, the committee, or the commission. So they can pick the ones that resonate the most with them.
So, yeah, you threw out a whole set of possible ideas for consideration, but struggled to find consensus around these. Some of it was technical considerations, some of it was just disagreements. You had more reds in this section than any other as well.
Dr. Turner?
No, I'm really confused about how there's so many yellow when so for this first one, there's 9 green dots, 2 yellow dots, but the next one for an increased time limit, it's 7 green dots and 2 yellow dots. And then you skip one down, this one has 7 yellow dots and 3 green dots for this yellow. It seems like there is a majority vote on some of them, but if you could clarify again, what makes the yellow dominant?
Are there any of these that we need to look at more closely? Yeah, because and actually, a few of you commented, possible, the yellow 3.1. Time limit should be increased. A few of you commented, you said, I did not remember hearing that. And then, so I wasn't sure what to do with that.
I think those 7 are the people who have never been to a if you've ever been to one, yeah. There should be at least 4 reds on there.
Maybe it should be decreased.
Dr. Turner, I think mainly, at least when I was recalculating everything, if it had 3, I put it in the yellow just as that bright line. 1 or 2 was the green, 3 was the yellow. There was no real reason behind that other than 3, that's a quarter of the voting member. It could be green, but also that's one that has an outside source that even if we recommend it, it doesn't necessarily mean it will go into effect because the city's standardizing it all.
Do we agree with that,
Yeah.
with that line?
Is there anything that needs to be revisited specific to that? Because there's some choices made there, but.
I think if you've got 7 greens, we probably need to talk about it to see. I mean, I don't agree with the time limit thing. And I'm surprised I didn't put a red up there, but it may have fallen off because some of them were falling off. But I'd be curious on 3.3, guidelines established for communications between CPRB and the police department. What was intended by that one, because that one's not ringing a bell.
That was one that, to be honest, didn't have a lot of discussion, because I watched the entire, like, however long the August 28th meeting was.
Yeah.
At like 2 times speed, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. It did not have a ton of context even in the meeting. It was just a recommendation that was on the list that was boiled down from everyone submitting something.
Okay.
I think from what I'm remembering from the meeting itself, it was basically that when the CPRB and the police communicate, it should not be formulaic, but it should be very clear, concise. It's all similar cadence. We're always gonna have like, oh, yes, Chief so-and-so, Assistant Chief Briggs says, all that kind of stuff, every single time, is my understanding of the context from the meeting. But this could also be one that 7 yellows, 3 greens, the city's just like, we don't need that.
Yeah.
You guys are adults, you can communicate with adults, that kind of thing too.
Can you make a comment underneath that one with what you just said?
Yeah.
To provide that context, because if we're confused, they will be as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was something that someone just threw out there because it came up in the community conversation
That would be my guess.
and,
Yeah, that could be. I will go back and look to see if there are any other notes that might inform or provide more context for that. Because that's one of the limitations of, doing this process is we capture them. Some of them aren't terribly well written in the moment, and we just kind of go with it. So I'll also go back and look to see if there's any clarification. And then back to 3.1. This is a good example of how not to write a item that you're gonna ask people to vote on. It actually conflates 2 different things. It's asking about the time limits. It's also saying that guidelines for interactions need to be enhanced. And so if you were thinking one thing and not the other, you might have gone green as opposed to yellow or red, yellow. So that's not the best way to write these because it conflates the 2.
The other thing too is on 3.2, the CPRB does have training courses identified in the ordinance. So I think it might be worthwhile to clarify with the group. Do we think those are all they need, or do we think there needs to be more?
I will share the handful of comments that I got back on 3.2 was essentially saying the training that currently exists is not sufficient. It's not adequate. So that was one of the questions that I had is, should this read needs to enhance,
or
improve training modules or courses?
Was that a consensus of the group that the training was inadequate?
and based on what?
Only 3 of us went through the training.
Yeah,
You haven't been through the training,
Oh, yeah.
not all of it.
Well,
None of you guys have. If you look at the ordinance, you did city ethics and you did Cora, but there's a whole lot of other training that none of you have been through.
well, I saw several tapes.
Yeah.
It was all tapes, which they border on worthless.
Yeah.
Mhm.
well,
Without,
Well, then it needs to be visited so that it can be accessible.
But I think that I guess what I'm asking is, they haven't been through it, but when you look at the ordinance, the training is identified in there. And so do we, as a group, feel like that training is adequate, or do we feel like it needs to be improved?
what I was hearing, at least from the ones who had the most immediate experience with that, is that it's inadequate.
Okay.
I mean, we can just add to have established, adequate training modules or courses.
and we need to say that the current training is not adequate.
I have a
Or
note
just
for
say
a footnote.
review the current training for
Yeah.
improvements and enhancements. And I think that would be a board thing that you all would want to do.
Yes.
I think there was also in that conversation and as Harrison has spent a lot more time with that meeting than I did. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was also a comment about wanting to make sure that, understanding, racial justice, equity, inclusion needed to be an integral part of that. I don't believe that that person said that what the city is currently doing isn't adequate, but I think they voiced a concern that folks on the CPRB should be well versed in those topics.
So that was referenced multiple times, but did not appear as its own recommendation.
Well, then I would like that to be added in the footnote to the training portion.
Does that work for everybody?
I mean, I like what she just said is, let's add that in there and say, for example, it should include. And list out what you just listed out.
Yeah, I have a note, diversity training is the minimum before being able to vote on the CPRB, but other trainings have 6 months to finish. That's what I pulled from my watching the video.
And there's a level of detail there that we're not gonna be able to
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's,
address here.
Yeah, that's where I think you let the board.
Yeah, but we need to flag our big concerns, and our big concerns are the training as it currently exists is inadequate. It needs to be improved, and that there's specific training that we want to emphasize as essential, and that includes DEI.
I also found the notes on 3.3 about the guidelines, so I want to clarify that. When I watched the video, I think there was some confusion about, it wasn't really communication between the police and the CPRB. It was more about between the public and the CPRB. With really establishing rules of engagement with the public, so the ability to effectively respond to and address complaints from the public, which includes the ability for the CPRB to field them and be respectful, not offend the public, reinforcing stereotypes, self-awareness about when you speak to the public, that you're not re-injuring that member of the public, and simple bullet points to remind you what to do. So we can fix that to be between the CPRB and the public, and determine if that is now a green, or keep it at a yellow.
Yeah, some of the training should include how to kick someone's ass out of the meeting. When they start hurling insults and threatening us.
But no, first we have to give them more time to do that
Well,
before we kick them out.
An
But I think we've gotten through the recommendations.
An alternate set of descriptions might be to ensure effective facilitation skills on the part of the chair of meeting and. Okay,
I know, just that we got through the recommendation, but there is on no recommendation 3.2, that should probably actually be a yellow because it received 1 green and 10 yellows. Didn't receive any reds, it probably should be a yellow.
which one?
No recommendation 3.2 near the bottom of page 9. 1 person on the board must be trained in data analysis.
Oh,
It should just be yellow.
yeah, is everybody okay with that?
At least I say that. I think it should be a yellow.
I think it should be no recommendation. I mean.
Can we look at this again and see?
That was.
It's probably on the second page.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. Say like, pull it off.
It didn't get any red, so why would it be no red?
We should stick with the same.
By our categorization that we're doing.
Okay, so we'll make that note as well. Okay, thank you. Let's talk about the 1 green, just to clarify, because there's more recent developments and we just need to be true to our rule, but also contemporary in our efforts. The recommendations put forward whether or not the CPRB and the Human Relations Commission should be merged. And that the idea for that came up in the context of the work, the parallel process of the Committee on Committees. And if you watch the November 21st City Commission meeting, the Committee on Committees put forward their recommendations. And without, as I understand it, their charge was to recommend going from like 49 committees and boards to come up with a plan to recommend no more than 10 as a more efficient way to do a lot of things. But also more in line with what's more typical in local governments of similar size in terms of a meaningful and manageable way for community engagement at the advisory board and committee level. And the recommendation that they put forward was, one, to align all the boards and committees with the strategic plan focus areas or not focus areas, but outcome areas. Thank you. So under safe and secure is an outcome area in the strategic plan. But specifically to consolidate the Human Relations Commission with the CPRB and make it one entity, something to that effect. And there was some discussion at the commission meeting. They decided certain things about other recommendations, but they said they would wait to hear from this work group's recommendations. Just reading the leaves, there seemed to be some leanings to be supportive of that idea of a merger, but they didn't formally declare that. So you're putting forward a recommendation that they should not be merged. Is there anything that you want to clarify, add to context that you feel is important to go into the report?
Yeah, it's a specialized board, not to be watered down with other business that's irrelevant to what they're doing.
Okay, specialized board.
Right, we're saying they need to have certain trainings, they need to have certain, so if you're volunteering to do this work, it should be focused on this work and not on other unrelated topics.
And also, we're proposing broadening the scope of the CPRB to get it out of the racial and bias-based limitation. So that makes it, I mean, human relations is human relations, but I think that might be why the two were paired in the recommendations, because it was a, you know, the sort of parallel purpose.
Yeah, I didn't hear a whole lot of context for that. I also didn't look into it, but
I don't think we have to. I think it's enough to say that the work that the CPRB is doing is important and shouldn't be conflated with other works. Their reasoning behind it, I mean, they're gonna decide what they wanna do regardless. I think us just saying, we think that there's enough work that needs to be done with this committee, and that the work that's being done by this committee is specialized, and therefore should not be commingled with other tasks that the city might be focused on. It doesn't mean that the board acts outside of the structure. The commission can do whatever. I don't mean to sound that way, but like, once recommendations come through, the oversight that they do, they can have those conversations in relation with other human relations topics that are doing citywide, but I don't think the folks that are volunteering for this should be focused on other areas outside of the community police.
So I agree to not be with the human relations board, but I think the city strategic plan is safe and secure and how we deliver emergency services and how that might affect my ability to have somebody come help me out on a heart attack or fire. That is all within the scope of what we're really looking at, right? It's how we do our funding, it's between police and fire and everything else. So understanding how we all are safe and secure, which is part of what this is about, is reasonable. Human Relations Commission is not.
Maybe I'm not understanding, how would the CPRB fit?
Well, I
Would
think
they be
recommendation
attending
was
safe and secure meetings? I guess I'm just. So if they're focused on emergency services and making sure that you have the resources you need. as well as reviewing to make sure
How we
that,
deliver our emergency services. Yeah. That's kind of what we're doing here, is how we react to deliver our emergency services, how we react to different complaints or whatever the case may be, so people feel safe and secure. That's the whole point of that piece of the strategic plan.
So, couple of things. So all boards would land within the language of the outcome areas of the strategic plan. So the sustainability board, there was a lot of discussion about that, would live within a certain category. So since this is policing that you're dealing with, everything related to policing is essentially in the safe and secure outcome areas of the strategic plan. But specifically about what would be recommended if there was a merger of the Human Relations Commission and what that would look like is a whole nother discussion that I don't know the level of detail or what that committee of committees is putting forward. But what I'm hearing you say is this board, the work is specialized, there's expanded scope of work, and that you're recommending that it not be merged. Anything else? And there will be some context language explaining why that is. Okay. Thank you. Great work here. Couple of things. This now needs to get put into a report format. I offered up a suggested outline for this: intro, background, executive summary, just a quick review of the work sessions. We've had 8 work sessions. We've had 2 community conversations, a description of some of the outcomes from the group discussion, the complaint process with the mapping and the recommendations specific to that, and then the expanded set of recommendations that includes the items that the new terms we came up with, or how we describe the yellows and the reds, but that's its own section and it's quite expansive. But the quick shot is there's an executive summary at the beginning when you read just the consensus recommendations at the beginning. And then there's a conclusion at the end. I'm putting it in a report format, so it has a cover letter, or excuse me, a cover. And then I'm pulling some of the photos, the images that were taken at the community conversations or from our meetings. If you have strong feelings about any of that, let me know. If you don't want to include it or something like that, just give me some direction and guidance on that. And then I thought, just from a stylistically, the community generated 400 plus quotes or comments on Post-its. And when you go back and look at the notes from the July 10th and July 31st community conversations, there were some fantastic quotes on those Post-it notes that get to the very point of the work that we just did. And so my recommendation would be to you all that we include a few of those to provide context for the work. And although you did the decision-making, you drove it, it was informed by your engagement in those conversations. And I think that they capture well the context for some of our discussion. So I was going through and just trying to pull a few of those out. If you have thoughts on that, please let me know, or you'll get a chance to look at them and say, yeah, I like it, or this one was great, this one didn't work. That kind of feedback is good. Also, you all as a group identified your ground rules for this work at the very beginning. You also identified your hopes and your concerns, and just spelled that out very nicely. And I would like to incorporate that in to provide the context for not only the challenge that you all understood coming into this, but also your hopes for this. And I thought that would also provide some good context for.
So the structure will be a cover letter that'll be like an abstract,
A cover sheet.
A cover sheet. So will there be an abstract at the beginning, something to synopsize it, because it sounds like. I mean, it's currently 39 pages, and I don't want readers to get lost before they get started. So maybe, you know, a paragraph or two abstract that just lets them know what's gonna happen. I think with what you're saying, a table of context would also be helpful. And the last three things that you mentioned, I'm kind of envisioning them as appendices. Is that what you were planning on doing?
You mean like pictures and the quotes kind of thing?
Yeah.
Depending on what those could simply be like a little text box off to the side with a quote. Think of it as.
Jonathan, you are at 39 pages current. I am worried.
We got bubble quote.
Which,
Yeah, but that would
Not all
overlay
400.
text.
Just like one on a couple, like 3 or 4.
Yeah, something like 4 total.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
I was at you.
Yeah, no, it's too long. That was good feedback that I hear. And so anything that can winnow that down, but also if we do an abstract and executive summary at the beginning, then the rest is just gravy. It's the details. It's
Right.
building.
It's not to suggest that the commission doesn't have time to review in detail and that they're not waiting, you know. But I think when we're trying to convey the work that we're doing, we don't want folks to get stuck in places when we have rich things later on. And so ways in which to help them move along in their review, wherever possible, is something that I strongly encourage.
Okay.
which is why I question including the reds at all.
Well, that,
Yeah, I
No, they.
know.
that was an agreement.
We'll
That
bury him later.
people would have had different votes if we knew that it wasn't gonna be included at all if it were red. You know what I'm saying? Like, we decided at the beginning that all of the suggestions would be added in. I'm fine with them taking up less space, but there's some that did not get the votes, but I think, and not everybody is here, but I think there are some people that would be quite upset if we decided that it doesn't get involved at all. We just said that they weren't popular. We didn't say that they were bad ideas and shouldn't be reviewed at a later date by somebody else.
So I'm envisioning like the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages of this tells you all the good stuff you need to know. And then a whole bunch of pages after that does the deep dive to build out context, nuance, debate, disagreement, all of that. But what I'm hearing is keep it short. It needs to be pithy and relevant and accessible. And, but we have all this other input that's important. You did important work, you did a lot of work, and it needs to also reflect that.
So in the presentation, how long is the presentation?
So that's a good question. So the presentation, if
Really about 10 or 15.
As long as you guys need. 10 minutes,
They're usually about 10 or 15 minutes,
that's what we tell.
and then
them.
about 10 or 15 minutes for questions.
That sounds right.
I think we can talk about 5 pages of executive summary for 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
We're gonna short.
And if me, maybe even faster, and everybody should bullet
No,
points on it.
they need to hear all of it.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. And a lot of it can just be. So in terms of timeline and process, the idea is to get all of this into a draft report to circulate to you all to make sure that we captured everything, because you covered a ton tonight, that we took good notes, and I think we've got a good handle on it. We need you to sign off on that. I have a technical question. You all need to approve the report because it's a group product. And so we need to formally, officially do that. And I'm not exactly sure how we do that. But once that's done, then it is submitted to be included in the commission packet, which needs to be done by the the Wednesday before the next commission meeting, or Thursday before, is when the packet goes out. And then it becomes the official document that will be seen by the commission. So just working backwards, that means that we would need to have all of your feedback and everything decided by like next Monday. And the question is, to formally accept it, do we have to be convened to do that?
Can you do a single vote back from each person? Would that be okay?
You want to avoid serial communications. I mean, I think if you need to give public notice of a meeting, again, essentially, that doesn't mean you have to physically meet. It could be a conference call, but the public has to have notice of that. And a time that they could call in and listen to the vote being taken.
Or can Zoom.
Kirsten, was your question, if he puts out, if Jonathan sends out a draft?
No, I remembered it's not, that won't be allowed.
So
What day are we talking
Is
about?
that a reasonable amount of time to?
I don't think it is.
That's done close, yeah.
I think between the mapping, the draft updates, people having a chance to review, provide feedback, any issues to be resolved in a week, I just don't know if that's possible.
And with holidays.
We're talking about the 19th.
Take off, go do the handle thing.
I don't think
I'm
we
not
did.
checking
I don't
mine.
think that's. Does it have to be the 19th, Casey?
No?
That was just an ambitious goal.
I mean, like my deadline for something on the 19th is the 8th. It's this Friday. Right? Isn't the Friday before the week before?
I feel like even Monday, the 11th is not possible. Because you need your drafters final. We need at least 2 days to review. We don't even have a mapping to review at this point. We have the content, but we don't have. I think we need to be planning for the January meeting and have everything done by the 20th.
I agree with that. Somebody has to get it together by then. For the holiday.
I think the 20th would give us, I mean, I can't speak to your
I guess
draft.
also to be clear, are you drafting the report? Or is someone volunteering to draft the report?
You're doing it.
I thought you did.
I drafted the recommendation section along with Dr. Turner.
The heavy.
I'll make a motion that Harrison draft the report.
And he's the only one who can vote.
Yeah.
Like,
Pretty delegated authority like that. So we need to have two things. So we need to get it all pulled together. And I'm hearing you're saying it's gonna take more time and you're gonna want more time. And I think I'm hearing that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Can we do Survey Monkey for the vote?
and then once, no, you can't, that's
Set
probably,
up the time for the meeting.
once you see it. So it sounds like we might have a couple of options. We could convene one last time on Zoom just to say yes. If you have, but what we can't do is have any kind of back and forth discussion, because that's a serial meeting and that's not
So
consistent.
once you get the report with the mapping, if you have any problems, tell you.
Mhm.
And if it's conceptual, then we would have to schedule a meeting. But it should be because we've all,
Yeah,
I know what we're seeing.
I'm not hearing any, I don't feel like there's any major uncertainties out there. It's just if you feel strongly about one thing or another, but. I think those kinds of things can be remedied in just a quick feedback to say. This sentence needs to be more clear or something like that.
Okay,
So should we just leave it then that, once you've weighed in, I'll prompt you for one last question of are you available to, reconvene either virtual or in person for a 30-minute or meeting on such and such date, and then we'll formally sign off and be done?
I just want to make it clear. The 20th is when we need to have all parts of the report to the board for review. Or is that when you're wanting them to have finished reviewing?
We gotta just decide the date, because if we're not trying to get it in December, then we can pick the date.
Like if I'm drafting, I need more than 3.5 days to turn
Yeah.
around a full draft
Yeah,
of a report, like. I have an 8 to 5. So.
I have a son believing that everybody's just being like, yeah, I agree, or what, I mean, it just hasn't been the case before, right? And it may be something simple, like, commentary or something like that, but I feel like what was said earlier about January seems much more reasonable to have everybody's input. It's
So
like
should we
January
just-
8th or
should we just pick a Monday in January and say, show up and we're gonna vote and approve it?
Via Zoom?
via Zoom?
January 8th.
January 8th via Zoom.
Yeah, because the 15th is MLK Day and the 1st is New Year, so.
That sound good?
January 8th, showstoppers only.
That's,
Via Zoom.
And then we're gonna try and have all the work done by the 20th, is that right?
yeah, so now let's talk about that date.
We're gonna back it up.
So, if we've got all the draft build out by the 20th, that would give you
Couple of weeks.
a couple of weeks, a little bit more than that to, review it, submit any other kinds of comments and changes.
Get someone to map the process, because I could probably do that knowing the PD part of the process and using it.
Yeah, we're gonna need some clarity.
Process there.
Alex Kimball Williams and Jacqueline Nance Mangler were very helpful in mapping out what we initially did. And Alex had walked us through Whimsical as a software tool to map that. So we'll circle back with her on that, but we will need just some clarification on that. I've done a ton of work to build out some of the other, in terms of the design, the template, some of the other narrative content, so, cause I was thinking if it was gonna be a really tight window, we gotta move on. So I've already got a lot of that in place, that will be easy to winnow down and put in there. But there's some other things, I want it to be a good reflection of the expanse of your work and a good reflection of the professionalism that you've shown in this. So if we have all that by the 20th, then that'll give you a little over a couple of weeks to weigh in with feedback.
But the
We'll pull it all
feedback
together.
should be sent to you in advance of us meeting, so that if it's something simple like a dangling preposition or missing punctuation, it doesn't need for all of us to talk about it. So I think we need to set 2 deadlines. One is the 20th for the reports to be done, and then another one for the committee to provide feedback. Because ideally on the 8th, we're just meeting to say, good job.
Yeah, nay.
Maybe if we got a commitment from all the lawyers to act all this out before then, they wouldn't have to wordsmith on the 8th.
Have you met lawyers?
Yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up.
We're not known for.
So the 20th is
Wednesday.
gonna be a draft that goes out to all of you that incorporates what you did here tonight. Then 2 weeks after that would be
On the 8th.
the 3rd of January, and that would be a deadline to have any comments
Oh, yes.
back to Jonathan,
By the
so that then those comments could be incorporated into a final draft that could go out to all of you on the 5th, and then you could meet on the Monday, the 8th,
Yes.
for a thumbs up, heads up, 7-up situation.
Yeah, but we probably need whatever's done after those last comments back to us to read.
That'll be on the 5th.
That'd be on the 5th, so you'd have the weekend, but maybe the 8th is maybe that's too tight.
That's,
No.
we can say it's the 3rd, but
Okay.
anything more, like some of you were great and gave feedback very early, right after I asked for it, which is great. So the earlier you get it.
Okay,
In
So
case
maybe we
ever
don't need
get
to
any
go all the way to the third, maybe we say by the first.
That's a holiday.
I like the third. Okay.
I like this.
The reason I like the third is if you are on leave
Yes.
and you're not worried about other work, it might be a good time to. Or maybe your family needs a break from you. Okay,
So
In that case, we would get it on the agenda for the 16th if we wanted to.
yes. Okay, so comments back to Jonathan by the third.
Yep.
And then Jonathan's gonna
Turn it
get
around.
a final on the
Do any
fifth.
of you have a particular passion on either design or on proofreading?
I would volunteer preaching.
Okay, I figured there was probably some, okay.
Question?
Well, I just wanted, I mean. I gave Jonathan several comments in the explanation of each of these,
Mhm.
none of which got into this version. So I would anticipate needing to make those comments again and us discussing them. So to say it's gonna be a yes or no type thing. You're right, I think there's gonna be a little discussion.
I think maybe a question on some of the comments that have been submitted by people generally needs to be. Is this comment too granular? Is it going beyond the scope of this work group? 'Cause I know I've made comments throughout this time period, throughout this several month process, half a year, almost a year process. That maybe got too granular. I don't need to bring them up in the final report. That might just be a question that we all have to face ourselves with and reconsider comments. I don't know what your comments are. They might be the best comments in the world, but.
I know you won't prejudge them here without seeing them.
Exactly, and it's like,
So-
but.
Yeah, no, I'm
the
trying not to
internal
do that.
process.
I'm honestly trying not to
Yeah.
do that. Hell, I had a whole Fort Collins ordinance I could have laid on you at some point, and I didn't, because that's obviously wasn't where we wanted to go. But there are things in there that I think need clarification if they're not already, or gonna be changed.
Yeah.
Did any of them, were any of them what we talked about?
Well, there's some of the statements in the explanation, I think, need to
That
be
needs to be
tweaked.
cleaned up. Yeah, so anything that you've submitted up to this point, I have and will be included. For tonight's purposes, I didn't include all of that in here because we would have been here until 1:30 in the morning. So I pulled that out, but I've captured all that because that narrative needs to be cleaned up.
Right, okay.
And just to assuage your concerns on that, a few of you said when you read some of the narrative that it read as if either the a particular position was being advocated for that might be different than what the multi-voting results would otherwise suggest. And so we need to clean all that up. So that's just like a general one. And there were some other specific feedback on the use of the term neutral and third party and defining that and cleaning that up. So I've got all of that. But that's the level of review that we'll need you to do when you get this this draft back, is I need you to read all of it so that you're comfortable with that. So
So what's happening,
allocate plenty of time.
what's happening between now and the 20th?
So between now and the 20th, a few things. So Harrison, you're taking the lead on cleaning up the language specific to the recommendations,
I'll do the whole report.
and you're taking a role on cleaning up the complaint process
And
piece.
diagramming, yeah.
Okay, so that's, and then all the notes that we captured here tonight. So that's all getting drilled into the draft.
So do you all want a deadline to get that to Jonathan so that he can put that with what he described he's already compiled with?
Jonathan should email what he's compiled to Harrison,
Okay,
and Harrison will incorporate it in the final report. And Harrison will have that report to Jonathan by the 20th.
And we'll
And then Jonathan.
circulate that back out to you all with some instructions on what you need. Go from there.
Jonathan, when will you get that to Harrison?
By the
Um,
end of the week.
We have to navigate how we collect feedback, because I have to get feedback. Because I can't put you in a role of you getting feedback from the.
Well, the feedback that you got already, that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Just send it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And the sections you've already drafted
And
about.
that, yeah, by the end of the week, just send it to me,
What you have.
what you have already.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, easy.
Okay, other questions? Anything else? Done great work.
Cool.
It's a tough project. Appreciate all that you put into it. We're almost there.
And who's doing the presentation? Like, not it.
Probably me again.
Good job.
I write the report, probably should do the presentation.
Maybe you can talk about that more.
And how many people are gonna do it?
I have
I think the feedback we got is, what I heard you say is 2 or 3 at most. Kind of the thinking. You can all be there.
I'm completely comfortable speaking to the commission. I've done it before.
Maybe we should have one from each section do it, someone from community, someone from police, someone from the board.
It's,
Yeah, I think it should be good to have one person from the board there to
oh,
maybe speak a little bit. Not me. You two.
If you have thoughts on the preferences, just email me, whether you're volunteering yourself or you're making a suggestion.
I'm willing, I'm not begging you to do it, but I'm willing.
Okay. All right. And just let me know on that. I'm a resource to you in helping to kind of prep that, whatever needs to be done. We'll need to have a PowerPoint, need to have some clear talking points and have clarity on who's doing what. So when we get up there, it's well organized and focused and speaks to exactly what the work group needs you to speak to. So, and it's not me. So that's not, this is your product. Here's questions everywhere.
so adjourn.
Anything else?
Second.
There's tiramisu back there. There's soup, fruit salad. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your work and look forward to wrapping it up. Thank you.